Hi everyone, I'm Elon Musk, and yes, this is my new show. As a father of 10 children, I really care about what the world is going to look like in 5, 10, 25 years. That's why I'm taking my masks off, my billionaire and businessman masks, to openly talk about the things that will shape our future. This is my show, and I'll say only what I really mean. There's a catch, though. In order to truly speak freely and not break any U.S. laws or be accused of discrimination or hate speech or something, this will be considered a comedy show. Don't want to get into a defamation lawsuit, right? By the way, this was my first joke. Anyway, here we go. Let me begin with the most terrifying thing imaginable. No, it's not Trump running for president for the third time. I'm talking about World War III. If history is any indication, major wars happen not when a few countries take it to the battlefield, but when the interests of multinational blocs are at stake. This is what's happening now in 2023. Tensions between major countries are rising to a degree not seen since the Cold War, but today the confrontation is not between capitalism and communism, it's between the winners of the Cold War and their new rivals, the so-called developing countries. Let's take a closer look. We, Americans, the West, residents of the G7 countries, have come to consider ourselves the ultimate civilization, and the rest, well, they're not barbarians per se. They exist only to produce our iPhones and, of course, to buy them from us. We won the Cold War. We're number one, right? But do you know what the so-called losers, the developing countries, were doing over the last 30 years while we were celebrating our victory? They were, developing and building their economies. They finally realized they could build their own iPhones and buy them from each other. Eventually, this led to the creation of BRICS, an alliance of 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and my homeland, South Africa, which joined a bit later. As of 2009, these nations are holding annual summits, shaking hands, patting each other's backs, and drinking champagne, while the host country foots the bill. Everything changed in 2022 when Russia was slapped with unprecedented sanctions. The US and G7 froze Russia's assets, pulled the plug on the country's access to international banking, and stripped it of a bunch of consumer services. I mean, everyone knows that in order to spark a revolution, you just need to take away Coca-Cola and McDonald's from the citizens, right? So the rest of the world thought, but what if the U.S. administration gets pissed off at us all of a sudden? And as we know, it's real easy to get on their bad side these days. As China's president, Xi Jinping, aptly noted after watching Marvel movies,
"We need to launch our own universe."
When world leaders take off their politician masks, they are actually worth dealing with. Thus, the latest BRICS summit, held in South Africa, had 6 new countries invited. Meanwhile, the G7 are still flexing in the mirror, oblivious to the objective reality. Sure, Argentina's new president decided not to join BRICS, but 40 more countries have expressed interest in joining the organization. The leaders of the so-called free world opened the Pandora's box that they can no longer close. What's the big deal, you may ask? After all, BRICS is an economic bloc, not a political organization. It has no beef with the US or NATO. But then there's this president of France, Emmanuel Macron, who wanted to participate in this year's BRICS summit, but could not. Mr. President, why were you barred from taking part in this event?
They thought I'd be spying for the United States and other G7 countries.
Well, it would appear that BRICS has at least one smart person working for them. This was another joke, by the way. You can laugh now. France's president was told the G7 is more promising than the BRICS. I was worried my show would get banned, so I bought a social media platform. Anyway, share this video and make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Damn, I sound like a 15-year-old influencer. By the way, I glanced at the figures some of the TikTok stars earn, and, turns out I make as much money as a 15-year-old influencer. So, we are witnessing an emerging rivalry between the G7 and the BRICS. And you know what? Although I live in a G7 member state, I believe we have as much control over the BRICS as Joe Biden has over his inner ear, The total population of the BRICS countries, including newly joined members, is 5 times that of the G7. And the difference in land area is 2.5 times. If territory was the only deciding factor, we'd all be speaking Russian right now, of course. Still, land means resources. And in our case, 58% of global oil reserves and 52% of natural gas reserves belong to the BRICS nations. And resources are, after all, the backbone of the economy. Even if we don't take into consideration its newest members, the BRICS has already surpassed the G7 in terms of purchasing power parity. The gap between them becomes even greater with the bloc's expansion. In geopolitical terms, the BRICS is like a ketchup stain on your pants. Whatever you try, it's just getting bigger. Speaking of quality, the G7 countries are current leaders when it comes to the quality of life and purchasing power. Sure. However, the BRICS countries are closing the gap fast. Who would have thought that consumerism is easier to export than democracy? Another thing the BRICS has going for it, or rather doesn't, is the fact that within the bloc, there's no single dominant power, no strict adherence to a particular ideology or political views. Unlike the G7, as long as you know how to use the wheel and you're not afraid of fire, you're fine. Just don't eat other people. Or, if you are a cannibal, just keep it to yourself. The bottom line is, BRICS is an inclusive organization and it will undeniably grow and expand. Increased economic integration and trade will likely lead to adoption of a common currency. And it's only a matter of time when the bloc becomes a political power, not to be trifled with. The question is, will the leaders of the so-called Free West be cool with it when it happens? Goliath losing to David? That's gotta hurt.
We won't let them do it. Only we are allowed to do it.
Pure logic and common sense, just like the U.S. foreign policy. I mean, the complete opposite of that. Here's where it gets interesting. So, what's going to happen next? Analysts believe that by 2050, China's economy will be the undisputed world leader. India will overtake the United States and secure its place as number 2. Indonesia, of all places, will be number 4. The G7 countries will account for only 22% of the global GDP, compared to 30% today. The U.S. will be responsible for half of that. As for the BRICS, it will produce a total of 48% of the global GDP. And that's not including new members. Give my calculator a break. I know, it sounds impossible. On the other hand, we once believed that the world was flat. Some people still believe that Eve was created out of Adam's rib, or even that Republicans can get with the times, one may ask. But how can we be certain that the BRICS won't fall apart by 2050? Fair enough, the BRICS as an organization has a lot of issues, probably as many as Trump's character flaws, but on a long enough time scale, demography determines the economy. Even if India and China part ways over Tibet, or certain countries decide against participating, and the BRICS goes the way of phones with good battery life, something else will emerge in its place. Long story short, the dominant role of the West will soon follow the footsteps of the average American's healthy weight. It will become a legend of the past. So, it will be up to the G7 to make its move. I see 2 options here. The first option, although the least likely, would actually benefit every citizen of the world. The G7 countries, primarily the United States, accept a new economic reality and compete with the emerging leaders in areas of the economy dominated by the West, until now. Healthcare, education, high-tech, and overly luxurious tourism. Competition drives innovation and is beneficial for everyone. Those ahead and those playing catch-up, eventually, this global cooperation leads to better quality of life for everyone. The citizens of the free world continue enjoying burgers and croissants, eventually coming to terms with the need to address the leadership crisis, population aging, unemployment, and other internal issues. And here's where it gets crazy. They try to actually do something about it. The West looks kind of like Hunter Biden's lawyer right about now. Still pretending that everything is A-okay, so let's move on to option 2. The second option is, unfortunately, more likely. In fact, that's what prompted me into becoming a YouTuber. if you will. It's very probable that the G7 will not appreciate BRICS' rising power and will try to undermine it at every opportunity. Kind of like Conor McGregor, eager to fight, unlikely to win. So, what will happen if the G7, spearheaded by the United States, continues to antagonize the developing countries? You know, provide Taiwan with a security guarantee, continue weapon shipments to Ukraine, increase NATO military spending, and so on. I could make another joke, but all of a sudden, I don't feel like laughing. After all, it wouldn't be the United States without acting like world police. After 30 years of calling the shots, the Western states grew complacent, believing their way of doing things will continue to be unchallenged. But it's a different world today, and a new Cold War is coming. And if not already here, there's no telling what will happen in the end. Whatever happens on Earth, we always have Mars, right? As you might have guessed, that's my cue. This is where I come up with a brilliant plan to save us all. After all, this is a comedy show and I can say whatever I want. And since I can never settle on any one thing, I came up with several plans. Your success or failure is nobody's business but yours, unless you have investors. Our task is prevention of an all-out war, so I decided to brush up on my history and take a look at how we stopped wars in the past. So here's my first plan. Back in the day, in order to save lives, whole armies, some battles were fought by just 2 of the strongest warriors. So I suggest we hold a fight, and I sure have a lot of experience in planning fights, just not an actual fighting. Let's hold a fight where BRICS and G7 duke it out on the arena, mano a mano. Let's say Putin versus Biden. Sure, it's easier to just return Alaska like nothing happened and save the embarrassment, or take other public officials, but I don't think it'll make much of a difference. You know those Russians, they have actual boxers elected as members of the parliament? Or maybe Xi versus Macron. Mr. Macron, what do you think?
Pardon me. I don't beat up with the elderly. I do like cuddling with them, if you know what I mean.
Can't say I'm surprised. Of course, the G7 could call up on its strongest fighters, but I don't think it would be such a good idea either. Just take a look at these guys. They're just average Joes from the developing countries. Moving on to my second plan. Again, let's take a lesson for history, shall we? Royal intermarriage. A wedding is the ultimate conflict resolution. It's brilliant, really. Just take a bunch of kids of the world leaders and marry them to each other. Biden's son and Xi's daughter. Now, I don't think we should consider children from European leaders, though. Just take a look at the royal family. Instead of guiding the world to prosperity, they'll just write a whiny book about how tough their lives are. So, we're moving on to my last plan, my favorite. There was a time when England united with their worst enemy, France, to fight against Spain. The United States joined Russia in the fight against fascism. The bottom line is, there's nothing bringing rivals together faster than a common enemy. And of course, we can await for it to occur naturally, like, say, a deadly virus, an asteroid, or international terrorism. Here's what I would do. Contact Hollywood and Bollywood. Produce a bunch of believable videos about extraterrestrials. Announce that we've received a troubling transmission from outer space. Open up Area 51 to the public and showcase alien bodies. That's it. Everyone forgets their squabbles, and the world is focused on building a giant space laser, or what have you. That will keep them busy for at least a few years. Although, judging by the news lately, someone's already thought of this plan and set it in motion. Is there a risk of World War III? Yes, there is. This is something that needs to be addressed, not by the West, but by humanity as a whole. We need to discuss it, not to force someone to accept certain terms, but to compromise, to build cooperation. We need to speak with candor, call a spade, even if it's not pleasant, and if it rubs someone the wrong way. And that's exactly what we'll be doing on our next episode of the UnMusking Show. See you next time.